Hello to everybody. A warm welcome to today's webinar on empowering academic writing with AI, brought to you by T-Systems and Thesify.a. My name is Mirjam Wamsteker and I will be moderating the whole session today. So before we dive into our agenda, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers who will be sharing their insight and experience with us today. First, we have Mark Oliver Gewaltig, the co-founder and CEO of Thesify. And Mark Oliver has been at the forefront of AI innovations in education, focusing on how AI can revolutionize academic writing. With a background in both AI development and educational technologies, Mark Oliver brings a wealth of knowledge on how AI tools can support students and education alike. He will be discussing the transformative impact of AI on education and showcasing the capabilities of the Thesify AI writing coach. Next, we have Andre Schreiner, the product lead AI in the office of the CTO at T-Systems. Andre leads the AI product teams at T-Systems who are developing secure and compliant AI solutions for enterprises. He will guide us through the process of choosing the right AI model for you and for your business, and explain how T-Systems AI Foundation services can provide secure, private, and scalable AI services. We're really excited to have both Mark Oliver and Andre with us today. They will each present on their respective topics, followed by a Q&A session where you can ask them your questions directly in the chat. So without further ado, let's get started with Mark Oliver Gewaltig, who will discuss how AI is disrupting education and the specific challenges addressed by Thesify.a. Mark Oliver, floor is yours.
So thank you very much first for giving me the opportunity to present Thesify here and also the collaboration with T-Systems on the AI foundation models that we're using. And I will try to give a very short overview over what we are doing at Thesify. So I will start with explaining a little bit what is ChatGPT, although I think by now everybody should be aware of its existence and what it's done, even if you haven't really played with it, but maybe you have. I learned today actually that OpenAI is now in the website ranking globally just below TikTok. So that can tell us a little bit about its popularity. And then I will switch to the topic of how AI is disrupting education and then how large language models in particular, like ChatGPT, can be used to help to develop students' writing skills. So what is ChatGPT? ChatGPT is a chatbot. You may have tried it, or if not, then you should have. And what is better than having ChatGPT actually explain itself to us? So it explains here AI and it explains large language models. So basically, ChatGPT is a question and answer system. And this is quite useful for a lot of things. So you can have AI explain to you, but you can also ask questions like, how will AI and LLMs impact education, and in particular higher education? And again, we get a very concise answer here. So it can enable personalized learning, automatic grading, tutoring and assistance, content creation, research assistance, and language translation. And if we look through these topics, we get the impression it's all very positive and it's all very bright. But if we at the same time look at what we see in the media, we see that there is much, much more skepticism all there. Yeah. So here we have this big headline: ChatGPT may lead to the downfall of education and critical thinking. And has ChatGPT rendered the US education report card irrelevant? How ChatGPT is disrupting education. So there is a lot of concern that tools like ChatGPT will essentially render most of what is happening in schools and universities useless, mainly for the reason that ChatGPT can just produce answers. And a recent study in Germany from the University of Darmstadt revealed actually that between 50 and 75% of the students, depending on the area, have already used ChatGPT for their studies. So we actually see, and that was a bit surprising to me, that sports is among the forerunners here in usage of ChatGPT, whereas agricultural studies are on the tail light, but still it's somewhere between 50% and 75 or even over 75%. And this study was conducted in 2023. And we can be sure that by now the numbers here have changed drastically. This is a more recent picture here on the right side where a philosophy professor promised that the students get an amnesty if they admit on using ChatGPT for their assignments. And here we have 23 out of 25 students, they replied they had used ChatGPT for their assignment. The poll that I was referring to also asked the students what they were using ChatGPT for or AI for. And here we see some of the answers they've given. So to clarify questions and explain subject-specific terminology, for research and literature review, for translation, text analysis, text processing, text creation, we're coming to that, and for problem solving, decision making, and so on. So there's a wide field of applications for AI. And of course, the question is that really what we would like to have? So the question is twofold now. It's not so much whether students should actually use AI, because we know they're using it and there is no turning back. But the question is, how should they use it so that it's actually beneficial for them? And we can divide that in these or answer these two questions. So they certainly shouldn't use it to replace the actual learning experience. So they shouldn't solve homework or problem sheets. They shouldn't write text or essays completely with AI. And they shouldn't also summarize required reading, because learning to read, learning to write, learning to solve problem sheets is a fundamental aspect of learning. And these learning experiences actually required to become a good scientist or to become a good student. However, AI can also be used to support and augment learning. So you could use it to create study plans, to create reading lists, to get help and explanations on assignments and topics, and get personalized feedback on problems or manuscript that you're writing, basically to augment or replace an instructor or teacher when this person is not available, which is often the case when you're studying alone. So I will use now the example of writing essays and reports, because writing is still one of the most important skills to master, even in the age of AI, because it has a lot of secondary effects on us apart from making us a better communicator. So if you train writing regularly, you develop your critical and analytical thinking, you improve your learning and your knowledge retention. It enhances your focus and your attention span, and it boosts your creativity. There's a famous mathematician, he's quoted here with, if you think without writing, you only think you're thinking. Meaning that if you just do the things in your head and you never write them down, you never actually realize where the holes in your arguments actually are. So before I continue and explain to you what the value proposition of Thesify is, we have a little poll here to ask you what you would expect of a tool that helps students as a writing assistant in terms of features. So we can you, Petra, can you show us a poll, please?
Sure, here you go. So the poll is, what features would you find most beneficial in an AI writing coach? Is it real-time feedback on writing? Is it help with organizing and outlining? Is it finding and summarizing background reading? Is it personalized study plans and reading lists, or others? You can write down what you would specify with others in the chat, and you can click more than one answer in this poll. So answers are still coming in. I'll just give you a few more seconds. All right, I will show the results. So we have 54% real-time feedback on writing, as well as finding and summarizing background reading, followed by help with organizing and outlining, and only 15% personalized study plans and reading lists.
So thanks a lot for that feedback. That is very interesting. So that matches very nicely with what we do actually at Thesify. So our value proposition is the following, that if you talk to educators and writing support at universities, you will find that writing essays is challenging, yet a vital skill for students to master. And what you also observe is that most universities do not actually teach the craft of writing unless you are actually in a creative writing course. So most students, they are left to develop their own methods to master this skill. And writing is actually the most important tool in furthering your career as a scientist. So our solution here is a personalized writing coach that guides students through all stages of writing. It proposes an effective writing process. We found that this is one of the biggest pain points for students. It helps finding, organizing, summarizing, background reading. It helps to structure the material, develop an outline, and it gives you real-time feedback on the manuscripts. And it supports the typically non-linear iterative writing process that students have to follow. So if you start our app, you will see something like this, and you can press this button to get started. And then our writing coach, Theo, that's this little mascot cat here, will ask you what you have to write and use that information to guide you along the process. And then you have a specific editor that you can use to develop your outline first and then the actual manuscript. So there's an outline and writing stage. And up here you see that we give you a process that can shuttle back and forth between exploring resources, so reading material, and receiving feedback, and then the final submission. And as a reminder, there's also the deadline when you have to submit noted. On the left side, you see an outline where you can navigate. And in this pane, we have our little assistant that guides you through your writing. So for example, if you have to write an essay on how AI affect the development of critical thinking skills, then it can recommend you topics to write about. And the green area here is for your personal notes. So you can take notes inside the manuscript, and then you accept the recommendations that our little assistant has given you to write about. That you first should define critical thinking, you should have a thesis statement, and then you should have a part on how AI may impact how we gather information. And then you can start writing, and you can see these little handles here, and they will allow you to drag different parts of your text upwards or downwards. So if you, for example, write your thesis statement here, and Theo, the assistant, will actually keep track of what you've been doing and also whether you've been following up on the recommendation that's been given. You can also select pieces of the text and then ask Theo about it, or ask it to find background reading or statement literature that will prove or disprove a certain statement. And So for example, here you could have, it recommends you potential citations, or it could also find you counter arguments to the statements that you are proposing, so that you find literature that is actually opposing the statement that you have. Finally, when you're done with your essay, you can look it up in proofreading mode, and you can get feedback from our AI assistant on the strengths and weaknesses and the readiness for submission. And one example of such feedback could look like this, so that you get a list of the strengths and the weaknesses, things that you might want to fix before submission. For example, here it is noted that you have many typos and grammar mistakes, that references are missing and keywords are missing. And then you can go back into editing mode and fix it up until Theo actually tells you that you're ready to submit. And then you can download the final result and submit it to your teaching platform that you're using. So that's a very rough sketch and a very quick rundown our platform. There is much more to discover. You will find it on our platform. You can actually try it out for free. But I will now move more towards what is actually behind it. So what are we actually doing? So there are essentially 4 steps that the writing coach is doing. So it extracts the essay topics and potential thesis statement. It finds relevant resources, which is quite elaborate for each topic, suggests outline based on the collected information, and gives you real-time feedback on the writing. In the background, there is a task architecture, as I call it, that draws on a central project context, which is essentially a database. So if you start here with entering your essay details, then we extract the topics. Using that, we feed the context and suggest an outline. The student then goes into writing mode. We give feedback, and that's a loop here, which is hopefully constructive. And then you have a final version here that you could send out, download, and send back. We also have to find and suggest background resources. And we also have to summarize individual papers so that the student can decide whether they actually want to read it or not. And all these green tasks here, they are done with a language model in the background. And what we've learned here is that for each task, we actually try different language models to determine which is the best at the lowest price and with the least restrictions. And for this task, we actually developed a little explorer here that uses the T-Systems AI foundation services so that we can check out the different language models for various tasks and see how well they perform. So you can see here that we have Llama, that we have Mixtral, GPT-3.5, and so on for the different aspects here. So the T-Systems AI Foundation services allow us to explore the commercial as well as the open source models. And since all the models in the foundation services have the same API, we can switch them around very easily. So what did we learn in this exercise? So first about LLMs. They're actually quite sensitive to small changes in prompts and versions, at least if you want to go into production. For many problems, smaller and cheaper models are completely sufficient. You don't have to buy an expensive GPT-4 API to solve them. And of course, systematic and automated testing is a must because the versions change and the output can change. So it's very good if you can track the output regularly in a systematic way. And LLM calls can be very expensive if you're not careful with this. What did we learn about the problem? Well, LLMs, large language models, are often better at telling you how to do something than at doing it, really. So that is advantageous for us because we want to guide students. We do not want to generate text for them. That would be considered cheating. So in particular, in reasoning and mathematical tasks, they're not performing very well. LLMs are good at developing different ideas and perspectives, so we exploit that as well. And something that is difficult is that LLMs are actually not very good at giving you critical feedback. So if you upload something that is really bad, it's difficult to get an honest feedback from a language model. So what's the summary here? So Thesify is an AI writing coach. So it coaches, it supports students with personalized guidance and feedback. The outline and editor is ideal to manage large documents because you can also take notes inside the document. And users benefit from advanced LLM capabilities, which are usually not accessible through a standard chat interface. And the T-Systems Foundation services help us to find the best LLM for the job. And what is also very important is that these systems are also the AI services are very privacy and GDPR compliant, which in the context of science is very important as well. And with that, I would actually like to thank you very much. So visit us on our social media or our platform to try it out.
All right. Let's start with your part, Andre.
Great, thanks a lot. And also thanks, Mark, Oliver, for handing over. Now, as I mentioned, as mentioned in the introduction, I would like to connect, especially to the last points that Mark Oliver mentioned, and talk about the more technical aspects and also, the critical aspect when it comes to building AI products or services like Thesify Writing Assistant, which is, the actual underlying model infrastructure and the actual choice of AI models and services. Back when I met Mark Oliver for the first time, actually last year in Switzerland, we had very intensive discussions on the topic, how to ensure a company like Thesify can have both access to the late, AI models in a very rapidly changing technology landscape, but also companies that have security and regulatory requirements, need to make sure that whatever they use, whatever is out there and introduced as the newest, best performing model, fulfills their regulatory requirements and does not harm them. So it was a perfect opportunity for us to collaborate and onboard Thesify actually as one of the first early stage customers on our AI Foundation services. And this is where I want to dive into. But before we actually talk about the solution, let's highlight a little bit deeper the challenges that we also as T-Systems see in a lot of use cases, not only for fast-growing startups like Thesify, but also in a lot of enterprise use cases. So we observe four major categories of challenges when it comes to selecting the right models for different AI initiatives. So the first point that I want to highlight is that generative AI models aren't the right tool for all scenarios. I like to compare tools like ChatGPT or their underlying models from OpenAI with a top-notch Swiss Army knife. So it has all the features you want. It is a perfect universal tool for a lot of tasks. So you can write poems, you can do translation, you can do picture detection or OCR or whatever. But when building products, we noticed it's much more smarter to pick the right tool for the right task and not to use very powerful models like OpenAI models as a silver bullet for all problems. And I think this is also something that Mark Oliver stated a lot, and we see that in the product. So we see that the more the AI landscape progresses, the more models we have, the more tools and libraries exist in the market. That statement of not relying on one specific model to do everything becomes more and more accurate. So when building an AI solution, it's essential to define all task-oriented use cases. So all the tasks, as Mark Oliver outlined very clearly, what do we want to achieve? What are the different steps that require some AI model or NLP model? So once you have this clear, you can basically cherry pick the best model, and that might not be OpenAI, it might be a smaller model, or even let's call it a traditional NLP model for the right task to achieve the best results. Now, moving to the next point, bigger is not always better. So while larger models, large language models, can be very powerful, they are not always the most efficient choice, right? That means that here I'm really talking about performance metrics such as response times or latency, but also quality of responses and accuracy of responses. There are now small task-specific models that can often outperform larger models in very specific scenarios, for example, in translation tasks or sentiment analysis tasks or certain languages that are only supported on very specialized models. And if you use approaches, and this is now becomes a little bit technical, things like retrieval augmented generation. So if you combine your private data with the intelligence of a large language model, there are even better approaches now to use specialized, fine-tuned, smaller models for your use case that do once you mature in your development journey and once you start to scale and realize, a lot of the things you have done with a very expensive, powerful, maybe even slow model now can be done with smaller and better optimized models. Now, the third point is the point of costs. So there are a lot of companies that really count on specific vendors of usage-based business models or usage-based pricing models for accessing large language models. And in the end of the day, once they scale or once they start to put a use case into production, they realize all the effort they put into the use case and also the associated ongoing costs are exceeding the actual benefit or the cost reduction that they wanted to achieve, or just don't make their business model or make the business model impossible or the pricing impossible. So you need to basically consider the model choice as in terms of costs as one of your design principles in the beginning. So when you build a product or a service or an internal tool inside of your enterprise, you need to ensure that you know the amount of users you want to serve, the amount of so-called tokens, words or characters you want to generate on a large language model, and then pick the right combination of models and the right deployment model to basically build your application and scale it later on. Now, the last point, not considered well enough in many cases, that security and especially regulatory compliance can really become a roadblock. So we as T-Systems serve a lot of customers in regulated industries like the healthcare industry, for example, public sector. But also in other industries, we have seen a lot of scandals and regulatory problems in terms of leveraging AI or large language models. For example, the EU introduced the AI Act, where we have certain use cases that are considered as high risk use cases or even unacceptable risk use cases. So for example, where human life can be impacted by a recommendation or the quality of a response. And once you are somewhere in this gray zone and you don't know whether you are meeting the right demands, this can become very tricky. So you might have a fantastic application, you might have prototyped and piloted it already, but you cannot just roll it out. You need to take a lot of effort into making it compliant. So compliance is something, and regulatory compliance and privacy is something you need to consider from the beginning. And there are mechanisms like input and output validation, guardrail frameworks, meaning you have like basically a rule set that you can apply on top of your solution to ensure that your model or your application doesn't behave crazy, right? Now, I want to highlight that last point a little bit more. So as AI usage continues to grow, so we're also encountering new challenges. And I think Mark Oliver already mentioned some of the headlines in the beginning regarding the educational sector, but also, aspects like privacy, copyright issues, plagiarism, and regulatory requirements are a problem. So there have been cases in the past where there were data leakages. For example, some of the models included personal data about specific people that were mentioning the news that were then false. And this data has been exposed in some use cases, right? So personal information can be exposed. The other problem that was also dominating the discussions is that some of the proprietary models, but even the open source models, are trained on copyrighted data, meaning this is also a concern once you are building an application and that aspect is somehow exposed. You are basically carrying the risk as a company to make sure that this does not happen. Yeah, I just mentioning this because I think this is something that we as T-Systems always consider from the start. When we build and provide services, we make sure that there are specific mechanisms to overcome this. Now, going back to Thesify, I would like to also address a little bit how Thesify, Mark Oliver and the team have made a great job of mitigating most of those challenges. And here are some examples that I wanted to mention. As I mentioned, Thesify faces the challenge as any company of model selection, right? So every day we have new models, right? So you might have a certain benefit in a specific model for a specific task. And one of the areas, and Mark Oliver was so nice to share that with me, is to compare different model outputs, basically to select different so-called reviewer models. And as you can see on the left side, there are several options to choose a different reviewer model for the different steps in the writing assistant flow. And each of the model and prompt configuration has its own strengths and weaknesses. And the choice depends on the specific requirement of the task at hand. So comparing those combinations is where a lot of time and effort is actually spent also in building solutions. And on the right side, we see an example of a cost comparison, which is also part of Thesify for different models. So you might have different combinations of models and prompts for different tasks, but they can generate completely different amounts of costs when it comes to model usage. And depending on which task you want to use or which model you want to use for which task, that might have a dramatic impact on your overall product costs. And one last thing I wanted to mention, which is, I think, from my point of view, overlooked a lot when building AI solutions is the user experience. So you have seen in some of the screenshots from Mark Oliver that the user experience of Thesify's writing assistant is very guided. So that means that compared to other solutions we have seen there in the market, Thesify does not offer just a free chat interface with some prompt templates, right? They have created a very specific flow that is very, very specific to the actual challenges you have in the writing process, right? And this also mitigates the risk of security issues, like end users trying to hack the systems with very clever prompts, trying to come to prompt templates or sensitive information, or the finding out the actual configuration of the platform, right? Which model is used, or which prompt template is used, or what is part of the training data, and so on and so on. You don't have that problem if you have a very good understanding of the underlying customer problem you want to solve, the different tasks that the user wants to solve, and if you have a very well worked out user journey that you then control completely in your application. And I see that mistake being made in a lot of enterprise applications, for example, things like HR chatbots, right, where chat interfaces without a proper understanding of what actually is the target of the user or the typical task that the user wants to do on the HR system and so on. So that's the reason why we see a lot of knowledge search assistants, why we see a lot of Q&A chatbots, but this also causes the risk of those chatbots exposing security sensitive information. Now, now that we talked about those challenges, what are good lessons learned from AI solution developments, initiatives that we can also share? So for me, there are three major key points. The first one is, we mentioned it already, avoid vendor lock-in with the help of a multimodal integration. So just to give you an example, in 2024 alone, over 20 prominent large language models or AI models have been released by 12 different companies, right? So it's essential to adopt a strategy and an architecture that allows you to freely switch providers and integrate multiple large language models and services, whether they are open source or proprietary. You want to have the best model or the best service for your specific challenge or the task that you have in your application. And if you have that flexibility, it ensures that you can always leverage the best tool available for the task, and that you do not rely on a single vendor or a single pricing model and so on. While, this is in the prototyping stage, this is all easy, right? So you can try different things, right? You can pick the best model for pretty much everything, but once you go and scale, this becomes a problem. So you need to have that flexibility from the start. And that's exactly what we offer as T-Systems, and I will come later to that. Point two, we have over 30,000 model variants available today on platforms like Hugging Face. What does it mean? So there are a lot of foundational models and also open source models, especially, that can be fine-tuned, customized, merged, further trained, and so on. And this availability of options highlight that more and more use cases move to customize or fine-tune models to meet specific industry requirements. That gives you greater control over your AI solution, and you can basically tailor your solution much better to the unique needs. For example, if you're in an industrial environment and you have specific terms or a specific language that your target users want to use, you would want the model to just speak that specific language, to use those specific abbreviations, for example, and you don't need a model that is good in writing poems and so on, right? So that's the reason, or that's the case for a customized open source or even proprietary model, but open source is definitely dominating this. All right, so customization is a powerful tool you can leverage down the line to really increase the quality of your solution and also reduce the costs. And point three I want to make is, according to latest statistics, 90% of AI startups fail. I would assume that is also the number we will see for enterprise use cases, so enterprise applications where a lot of chatbots are built and so on, but they don't really have long-term traction. And I think one of the reasons for that is first of all, the dynamic technology landscape. That means that a lot of companies or startups invest in technologies or solutions that are overtaken by the advancements in the space. For example, a lot of companies invested into retrieval augmented generation stacks that they have built themselves on top of previous versions of models, but then there were new libraries or offerings from cloud providers or hyperscalers that basically made those things much better. There were advancements on the model side, on the tooling side, that made the whole technology stack not useful anymore, right? So those companies, if they are a startup, have to pivot. If it's an enterprise initiative and money was spent on it, it pretty much becomes a failed initiative. But I think the actual problem is that companies try to find problems for very nicely looking prototypes or solutions. So they focus too much on the technology space and try to find a problem and find a use case, rather than focusing on the problem space and spending the majority of time of understanding the problem, creating a good user interface or a user journey, like explained before. And one of the lessons learned is focus on the actual problem, not try to find a problem for the technology that you maybe have seen in a customer demo or in a hyperscaler demo, right? And there are additional things I already mentioned, but I will go quicker here. Let me just check on time. Okay. So now finally, let's discuss what we as T-Systems provide to companies like Thesify to address those challenges. And here I would like to give you an overview on our AI foundation services, our one-stop shop for LLM access, with no vendor lock-in. You already see that implied in the logos. So as I mentioned, many models, many providers, but there are of course dominant ones that are also dominating the discussions in the media. And we as T-Systems are in a unique position that we have strategic agreements with all the cloud providers, but also the model providers, where that allows us also to provide those capabilities through the same interface, the same service as Marc-Oliver already mentioned. Now, if we look at the foundation services and the different components that we offer, we can basically distinguish into three major areas. So the first component is the LLM Hub Serving API. So it's a platform as a service approach. That means that with this interface, so it's first of all an interface for technical teams, we abstracted the complexity for AI project teams to interact with various cloud services or API standards to access LLMs, so large language models. So we have an OpenAI API compatible interface. You can use any large language model available out there from the same endpoint. So no need to talk to 5 vendors in parallel. You don't need to use the Google standard or another standard to integrate large language models into your application. No, you can basically use an OpenAI API compatible interface, and it doesn't matter which model you are getting, right? So inside of the service, we offer different ways of how the models are running or how they are served. So one option is the shared instance. So you get access to the latest LLMs, open source, proprietary, and you basically have a pay as you go pricing. Yeah, so you pay and you can choose your model and use it. Once you know which models to use, or you have a high security data protection focused or large scale use case, you can switch to the private instance, meaning that you get a dedicated model of your choice, deployed either in our infrastructure or the infrastructure of our cloud partners, so Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or AWS. And we basically make sure that you get the same endpoint that you, for example, use to do your prototyping or to develop your application. But the model will be exclusive to you. It will run in your infrastructure or in our infrastructure. And here, the interesting part from a T-Systems point of view, we also offer hosting in Germany on our Open Telecom Cloud, which fulfills all the regulatory requirements and GDPR requirements that you have in sensitive industries or government industries. We also offer, on-prem deployments in your own data centers. So the second cluster of offerings is our private retrieval augmented generation API, which will be available soon. So this service offers basically the end-to-end hosting of your document-based full retrieval augmented generation system with things like a vector database and basically a management platform that allows you to do role-based access control. And basically you can decide which type of retrieval settings you select, what type of responses you want to have, what type of embedding model or underlying large language model you want to use for your LLM. And we have created this type of API specifically for companies who might have, very specific user interfaces or existing applications that they just want to enhance with an AI solution, with an AI assistant, but they don't want to manage vector databases and come up with smart approaches on how to combine their private data with the intelligence of a large language model. So we abstracted all the complexity from them and offer this as a service, so you can consume basically ready-to-use responses from the API and integrate that in your enterprise applications. Now, both of those offerings are for technical teams, or we can also deliver those with our own teams. And on top of that, for business users, we also have user interfaces or ready-to-use applications like the Magenta Smart Chat is a intelligent chat application that leverages all of those capabilities and basically allows you to upload or connect to all your enterprise data and then create really conversational interfaces for the specific topics that you have. So you can create all type of chatbots or AI assistants for this. We have a chat interface by default, but you can also add automation on top of that. We also work on specific applications like our law monitor, for example, that is basically observing regulatory regulations worldwide and can auto detect changes and notify teams that are working in this space on certain regulatory impacts that might comply their products or services. Right. So this is an example on how the Magenta Smart Chat looks like. And I want to also mention, the data protection aspect, especially here. I think it's very important to a lot of customers, especially in Europe, that the models run in Europe or even in Germany. So we have here the option of the Open Telecom Cloud hosting. We really take the topic of data protection very seriously, and also compliance with EU AI Act regulations. The data that you put into the solution stays under your control. There will be no sharing with cloud providers or third parties if you don't prefer that. That's actually the default. And also there is no fine tuning or improvement of the actual product or service if you don't want to use that data for improving for example, the responses. Now, this is especially interesting, of course, for enterprise customers. And just to deep dive one level deeper, I think most of the things I already mentioned here. So I think one of the additional things that is usually happening in the background is the things like user administration and limit management. So for each model, for each service that you use on the platform, you can basically cherry pick on limits. So you can administrator usage limits for each connected model. So that gives you full control over how much each employee, for example, can use the system. We also have basically control topics that, for example, AI applications should not talk about, like competitor products or sensitive topics you want to prevent users to discuss with an AI assistant. We also do model benchmarking, which is very important. So we provide an analysis and a presentation of strengths and weaknesses of different models. We also do pricing comparison and give you different choices of selectable models. So we already help you here in the solution development. And also additional services like prompt enrichments, if you are interested in that. So we have experts that are very experienced at coming up with really good system prompts. So the type of questions basically you ask in the flow of your LLM usage. And of course, we have a AI project practice with more than 800 AI experts who can deliver end-to-end solutions on top of this. Now, how can you try it? This is my last slide. You can basically scan the QR code and you will land on one of our open source projects that we build on top, so people can just explore things. So this open source project is called Create TSI, and it's a low code CLI, so command line interface based tool to create AI assistants in minutes with the help of the AI Foundation services. So once you have an API key, there is a form for that. You can directly start to build your own AI application. For example, you can crawl a website and create an AI assistant for your company website or for some documentation page that you have, and then run it locally or combine it with a search engine like DuckDuckGo or Brave browser that is very privacy focused, right? So that's all from my part. I think we need to come to the Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you, Andre. That was really a great presentation from both you and Mark Oliver. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat, and we still have a couple of minutes. So let me start with the first one. Mark Oliver, there was a question, what are the primary challenges that Thesify.a addressed for students in academic writing?
Okay, so the main challenge is that students usually get very little guidance on how to write. So the process of writing. So they're getting instructions on the form, on the grammar, on how many pages, how many words, the font size, but they're often overwhelmed with the question, how do I structure my work if I'm given a particular topic, and what do I actually have to do to get the information to fill the pages that I need to fill. So this is essentially where we are starting, and we've talked to many writing support teams at universities about this to actually learn where the pain points are, because once you are long enough in the field, you actually don't really know anymore what the problem was initially for you.
Okay, thank you. Interesting, and it's always good to learn from yeah, practicing, isn't it? So that's great. Andre, I have a question for you. Um, so what are the typical challenges enterprises face when integrating AI models, and how does T-Systems help mitigate these challenges?
Yes, I think I pretty much went into those details in the presentation, but I think one important thing that I really want to stress is the migration effort, right? So as I mentioned, they start with a good performing model. Usually it's OpenAI, right? So they start building an application, and then they have their flow worked out, right? And then they go into production. They deal with the topics I already mentioned, like security, data protection, scale, and costs, right? And then there is the the very painful challenging of basically refactoring the solution and trying to find better models, trying to find alternative approaches on, how to use multiple models in combination and so on, and then dealing with different providers and negotiating good contracts basically once they go a little bit larger with those providers. And I think that's kind of one of the pain points we try to resolve with the one API, all models. Ideally, you just need to switch two parameters and you're good to go, right? There is no need to do any major changes on your application to migrate, right? That's, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then looking at the time, we have 1 minute left, and I see a couple of questions, but one I think is a nice closing question to actually both of you. Um, how do you see the role of AI evolving in education, but maybe also in other segments over the next 5 years? And what steps should institutions and companies take to prepare for these changes? Mark Oliver, could you start maybe?
Yeah, I think AI is really putting at the test what we want students actually to learn and how are we going to evaluate it. It's similar to the introduction of pocket calculators in the 70s and 80s, or computers in the 90s, when educators, they got used to a certain, let's say, routine of doing things, and suddenly there were tools that would shortcut exactly these aspects. And so, for example, if we take the question of essay writing, written assignments, now you can just crank out text with ChatGPT in seconds. And I think educators really have to ask, okay, what is it that we want to test? And is the final essay really just a proxy for learning how to understand content, to structure it, to bring it to paper in a way that that the reader can really engage with the content? And I think educators, they have to react to that and rethink how they're doing things. And right now we see a lot of institutions putting out bans on certain technologies, but this is essentially trying um, to stop a flood with a bucket of the flood is coming, and institutions and educators, they just have to reassess what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Andre, anything from your side to add to that?
I think that was a perfect response, but I think for me that one specific thing that I really see is personalized learning journeys. So learning, we can basically outsource a lot of administrative tasks to AI and really focus more on personalized learning experience for students, and also focus more on the transfer learning or the methodologies rather than the actual the actual information that can be retrieved from anywhere in the future. And I think this is super important and important to understand also for institutions.
Exactly. Okay, well then, thank you both for the presentation. I myself learned a lot. I think we have a great future ahead of us if we do it right, with the right models, with the right connections, and with the right security on top of it. So thanks a lot. Thanks all for your participation and also for your interactive participation in the polls and in the questions. I wish you a great evening and hope to speak to you soon. Thanks a lot.